Yeah. Actually, me as well. That's right.
Thanks.
Alright, cool. I sent the app. Everybody good? You good? Sorry, just give me one second. Alright, cool. Communicating sphere such a debater structure to extend disability. Communicating space to those who conform to marketable forms of affect by awarding normality, conformity, and suiting those who are team and common through perceiving disabled affect as parasitic to disabled affect, always slowing down the flow of information. The drive to perform means disability is always constituted by affective labor and regulated to the bottom of the communicated register by causing violence and exclusion, say PR 13 disability constituted by affect related to specification or competition for the able body systems, which cannot move efficiently. First, we call accusation gates that are states out, performance and competency necessary to what is needed for full participation and protect the rights of the market and the just marketable body subject to perform unless disabled body speaks exploited creation of affect essential affect labor collides economy and culture and service production to become communicative affect de-instrumentalized and elevated to the level of human relation. Those who communicated disabilities sort of put stress on mechanisms of production and therefore disadvantage of highly competitive markets. Those who are disabled communicatively or marginalized affective labor concern producing marketable effects to try to advertise or sell and press those who study before try to perform competency in normalized fashion runs roasted over bodies affectively abnormal. All disabilities are reconfigured by neoliberalism and affective labor and the world is structured by the disability drive. Disability drive looks to two-tier affect response of pity between a non-disabled subject and a disabled object. Right? Mary pity removes the ego's ability to distinguish itself from the disabled other by forcing itself to reconcile with the fact that ability status is ultimately temporary, invoking secondary pity, distancing of the ego from disability by making measures of productive status and desire to eliminate disability from social consciousness through medicalization or institutionalization below 15. And primary pity until it makes the open self and others such an ego and becoming permanent pain that may probably belong to someone else's affective response will feel variable because it was a drive towards disability which menaces the ego's participant in helpless or culture contemplating another person suffering is to confront the question, could this happen to me? Secondary pity attempts to heal primary pity self-righteous effects by converting primary pity into a feeling as verbal and at the same time defend against it by ego by agonizing oneself at someone else's expense. Disabled people are too familiar with these behaviors. Secondary pity compasses are culture's most cliched reaction to disability, charity, tears, and culture. These affects and lowers the ego, the pity at the expense of someone else. It happens to the moment you feel primary pity, and then almost before we can like deny that feel it. Primary pity, someone telling that our culture has been driven more to kill people. The name of secondary pity who have also been driven to lock people's attention, let them languish on the street to stare to punish and incentivize all in the interest of knowledge that ego does all in of primary pity, and disabled bodies are excluded from any notion of progress. Imagining a better future starting with the notion of disabled trying to meet futures that requires a cure elimination of disability below 15. The idea for not fighting for this figure is unthinkable. Who would, after all, come out futurity and so against life, against a child who, without a cure, might not even have a future. Future. The logic relies on rehabilitated futures, and the futures invented in times of fantastic child. And the future is threatened by disability. Futurity is imagined in terms of providing fantasized eradication of disability. Eugenic ideologies are grounded in rehabilitated futures. So elimination of disabled would bring a better future, and the role of the ballot is to vote for the debate of the best domination of progress within and out of debate. Anything else papers over inevitable violence against the disabled body, justifying visualizing violence for the false sense of progress. Self-16 disability really enters the communication sphere. The visceral question that accompany communication about disability and strategically relocatable conversation ability does seem to permeate the messages or inspirationally optimistic. Political correctness underscores how communication operate within the rubric of conflict. Disability represents an antagonism foundational to the core of American values. Of the radical promise of our theories of social stability, then they are complicit in the neoliberal eugenic project. Underlying optimism gives completely unquestioned social death has already occurred. The disabled are being rendered culturally unintelligible and physically fungible. We need theory that breaks down the notion of progress, and vote affirmative as an endorsement of no future and unyielding pessimism. No further ballot represents a method of refusal to support structures that will always relate violence. Campbell, to what if we turn our backs on it again? This disabled person started equivalent more than make claims to integrity based on quality of sameness. There's no future. The utopian design lies from promise the extinction of the pyramids. The able is unfounded on a utopian humanist desirable and discussing Western culture. We try the emergence from the unruly period of adolescence as a society process. Applaud the pursuit of long life and apologizing to blatant little or concern for longevity. People who live in rapid bursts are characterized as dangerous of politics of negativity. However, the number of neutral and ability instead of finding this characterization by dragging queerness into recognition, embrace negativity, and only a refusal of this world of justice ableism as a basis of communication. We defend the one who sees affective pessimism as an example of dying within topic discussion. The refusal to breathe life into the resolution. Pessimistic dyings break from institutional participation as a starting point for politics. Favor disrupting the circulation of discourse is predicated upon optimism of disabled death. This hijacks communications by purposely forefronting discussion and pessimism. So, two disabled are dying, including pivotal disability studies. This is not the disability studies project of utopia. Dialogue is riddled with pain. Attempts to make space free from constraints of optimism. Outside communication programs, a layer of optimism has been communicatively imprinted upon the negotiation of disabled identity. Our cultural erasure of disability push collaborative performance, which put disability on stage. A larger purpose is to antagonize the erasure of disability with communication studies by analyzing the pessimist performance, and disabled folk internalize the disability drive, which uses space ontological negative, causing a rupture between the self and the normal, resulting in psychological violence. And only a method of refusal can allow disability not to be obsessed with eradicating itself. Campbell, ancient depression is a result of our treatment. Harbor the pain and negative self-images, turning them into weapons which re-injure ourselves. Internalized ableism means to assume an identity other than the one's own. To separate my existence from my disability physically untellable. Their body texture appears locked in internalized ableism. It is a simulation that matches the subject to simulates what it is to be disabled. Morphing ableism pairs effects perform new hybrid being disabled. Like performing ableism, disabled people complicit in reinforcing pair as an outlaw ontology. And our framework reinterprets a traditional white frame of reference through multiple modalities to search for an explanation of the psychic force that governs Western civil society. Our scholarship assumes generic criticism below 15 other for its specified structure. His model leaves room for theorization of great diversity content that feel that structure factors such as gender, queerness, race, class, colonialism, disability can radically alter the ways in which culture structures the ego, the drive, and sexuality. Come to figure the fluidity of Ford's paradigm has been the basis of important interventions by social theorists who I examine the ways in which cultural protection of disability drive shape intersections of oppression, including misogyny, homophobia, white supremacy, and colonialism. I will neither assume nor attempt to establish that psychoanalytical ways of thinking will be useful to every subject and culture. The words our culture cannot reference every person, but that is able as social and psychic structures to see the bounds of the demarcations of the U.S. American culture, the Western modern industrial societies. Give me a second.
Why is the judge endorsing your strategy of negativity necessary for it to solve?
So I think our sub-2 evidence is really good, talking about how forefronting the AF, interjecting the 1AC into the research model debate, kind of disrupts how disability perceived in communicative spheres. Self talks about how in communication programs, disability always has optimism around it. The 1AC is a break around from the standard forms of communication and is a form of affective pessimism, we think the ballot represents a tool to interject the affirmative into a communicative sphere such as debate.
Why is injecting that into a communicative sphere valuable?
to forefront discussions of things such as disabled killability, things like that.
So discussions about that are valuable.
What do you mean by discussion?
You said it forefronts discussions of disabled
SELF2. The evidence, the
yeah.
argument that our SELF2 evidence is talking about is how forefronting things such as disabled killability are key in communication programs. Anything else is tied to the eugenics project of violent knowledge production because it's always tied to knowledge production that is on the future. But our Merlot-2 evidence and all of our Merlot evidence has made a structural claim that disability is excluded from that future.
Okay, what's a communicative space?
Spaces where communication exists, I think debate's a great example of it.
So anywhere communication exists is a communicative space?
Our St. Pierre evidence is in the context of competitive communication and communication itself, but what I would say that communicative spheres often have competition inside of them.
Wait, where does this say it's about?
The intensive quote, here's a line, here's what I read, quote, the intensification of competition.
That's talking about competition in capitalism. How is that equivalent to debate?
Because, wait, what? Because there's two debaters, one person gets a ballot. St. Pierre's argument is that disabled folk are never able to perceive themselves as marketable embodied subjects.
So why does that, disabled people don't view, how do we know disabled people don't view themselves that way?
What?
You said disabled people don't perceive themselves as
no, able-bodied people don't perceive disabled people. St. Pierre's argument is that disabled affect is perceived as parasitic to systems of communication because it literally slows down the flow of information. In order to rectify this parasicity,
why does disabled affect slow down systems of communication?
So I think ASL is a great example. It's much ASL is physically less slower than standard forms of communication, such as that we're engaging in. A great line, a great St. Pierre references in this article, talking about a line out of the St. Pierre article is, quote, a stutter is seen as sucking the life out of a valuable conversation. Things such as this show how disabled affect is perceived as parasitic.
So how do you know what is going on in able-bodied, how do you know what's going on in an able-bodied person's mind when they perceive that? Yeah, perceive. Are you talking about the disability? So you just said able-bodied people have this inherent reaction. How do you know they have that?
So are you talking about the disability driver or St. Pierre evidence?
Either.
Okay, well, it's two different pieces of evidence that come from two different types of studies. Our St. Pierre evidence is more of a social analysis of disabled communication itself, and is an analysis of how disabled communication has been excluded. Our below evidence is a theory of psychoanalysis, which is much different.
To the case.
Yeah.
Oh, so.
Two.
Yeah. Topicality or interpretation, the applicants defend the desirability of topical action resolving each legislative policy abortion phrases 64 resolved determination by legislative challenge by law provided defined by Merriam-Webster supplier make available military strengthens military capability content and also 18 is any transfer English strength military capability of the nation national military the monetary and foreign transfer money and virtual weapons of the military equipment or materialistic vote negative for predictable limits post facto topic adjustment structurally favors the outline and manipulate the balance of power to anchor around the resolution states point not debating the topic allows someone to specialize in one year library for further examining huge edge of people who switch research focus every 2 months which means their arguments are presumptively false because they haven't been subject to what scrutiny. 2 impacts. First, is fair debate is fundamentally a game which requires both sides to have a relatively equal shot at winning and is necessary to give meaning to the work we do and actualize any benefit of the activity. The only impact to evaluate deciding who wins or loses, which makes fairness the only impact you can evaluate. Second is switch side and idea testing only limited topic that leaves a role for the negative less contestation. Second order testing that overcomes polarization, switching sides forces them to scrutinize their own beliefs, which is valuable for developing defending their own convictions more robustly. Posture 16. Only if our reasoning exposed to contrary arguments can be tested merits-based go through the labor of the negative agreement without exposure to be deceptive group of like-minded people deliberates informational cascades producing extreme polars that can be countered include dissenting voicing the probability consensus low exchange of arguments and testing your position. You cannot come up with line party the characters that everybody else believes argument chooses. Well, our arbiters much more defined upon our argument might be more helpful to discuss the liberal position schooly than with our argumentation and purposes beyond persuading him to test one's conviction. The rational is not lying. This discovery simple right is about a our case by doing fair. Every the cost of developing elaborate arguments. Topical version of the F-say one say ending military is a refusal of Western liberalism's attempt at militarized expansion and its view in military is weaponized in a way to produce the disabled killability that they are discussing. Just as the topical version just proved their negative parent and that's a contestable stasis point. Next off. Claims of metaphysical ontology and apparently depoliticizing walking in politics rather than opening up the possibility of pragmatics of becoming acting directly upon the contingencies of power relations that make up the status quo. Buckmore's 13 politics not ontology. Ontological never political nuclear policy, meaning the political one which we attempt to discover the ontological essence of the political theory degenerate, which there's no return actual political price ontology disclosing the multiple ways of political and political culture and temporal configuration. The ontology turns philosophical process one day. Ontology and political implications are serious by resolving the question being before political analysis. Ontological operators mean different than economies, meaning that once beings are graphical turns selective action. Ontological never political existing creature men with black burn capitalist workers gay straight in these categories are no way stable difference matter less than where the unemployed prison records are data being explored being not fit neatly into our political media by society's conditioned form of philosophical thought as every obligation to be inactively political life. In the apps, anti-institutional politics reentrenches the power of capital by leaving intact broader structures of global political economy, creates catharsis that France actually gets ecological catastrophe and crisis in neoliberals and parenting manual 15. The capitalist system would, like U.S. citizens, not made in government redistribute wealth, and they say right to want to educate the working class and complete industry left embrace being outside government, cause democratic resources, state treaty, and arena flash global health. Turns out government is used to justify the stereotype and crisis of climate change exists in legal mechanisms to take capitalism more think about bureaucracy that are part of complex systems who do not make admits the EP position anti-state determination local doesn't recognize the global economy works the fossil fuel industry is powerful institution possibly rebuff the anti-state radically tell the people need liberty we need to restructure the state. The alternative is to build class solidarity around a new socialist movement focused on making concrete demands and progress that can transform American society. That is necessary to propel movements to challenge Trump, dismantle ableist political formations, and save life. Schwartz and Carter 17. The possibilities for internal politics are resilient, reforms beating capital, enhance working people, democratic fusion, must be followed single payer, healthcare, naturalization of agencies, sources be the forefront fights, we simply be the best activists, sources have to offer analysis of real systemic creates and offer from team, which is central agents of change, or speaking collective movements, be characteristic, ignoring racial justice, working class, disappointing, brown black, and immigrant fighting these society precisely on these ditching path the dominant ideology with Marxist human universal rights, cut it out, rights, and capitalism is the best explanation for the direction of disability on a daily basis. The aftermath cannot address the material consequences of transnational capitalism as well as 14. The production of disability on a daily basis, like access to affordable food, employment, housing, crime, and care is led to proliferation of federal illnesses, resulting disabilities, transnational capitalism, immediately capitalist flow across borders, ensuring that labor, obesity, and economic policies, dismantling safety nets, resulting in shortage of food and adequate health care and deplorable living conditions that continue proliferation of disability, notion, pain, are animated by unequal relation to production, consumption, enablement, of safe, unprecedented, disable of other parties, material, social relation of transnational capitalism, ableist notion, disability, and needs to justify continued marginalization, capitalist economies. Case. The role of Alex is for the better debater. Anything else is self-serving, arbitrary, begs the question of the rest of the debate. You should vote negative on presumption. The affirmative advocacy of current negativity does not solve the harms they've isolated for two reasons. A, systems. So when he argues that material institutions like the ADA create the social realities that replicate violence, but seeming to B, their advocacy is literally do nothing, giving up on the future, embracing pessimism, cannot resolve any of their harms. And the psychoanalysis debate. Death Rise thesis is outdated. Smith 17. Every psychoanalytic theory attempt to capture theory, development theories from the universal development stages for theory models generally considered highly questionable theories are increasingly challenged or not possible validation development and research development of psychology also in the evolutionary biology cast out on central and basic assumption even contemporary theories continuously seeking self-differentiation while efforts performed good attempt by the locality to be equally inadequate way gets more up to date across the scenario research program for wide series of literature present different clinical reputation and psychotherapists. One reason is due to the unresolved contradiction of force right not neurological systematic whole, and there is zero justification for psychoanalytic theory. Robinson 5 Lacani analysis look more properly and distinct and explanatory greatly case not to help to convert the already formulated theories applied to examples that already true. Psychoanalysis becomes a way to avoid studying specific cases, and future is not the sole province of the child. Ruby 17 only those who have a future luxury flirting with the idea of rejecting those whose future are confidently thrown are unlikely to advocate annihilation because that's can of the future to be rejected. Future you all more reasoning follow and imagination glimpses glimpses other face welcome the elevates the child and not the future never the province all children not have the vast majority of the world's sort of the way they deal with the world's messy, not to reject the future wholesale, rather reconfigure parameters that can be done by resurrecting principles of hope that are relational. And pessimism presumes a closed system, which is an inaccurate description of contingent social systems that ignores the history of resistance. Vote negative, I want to risk of defense to ontology. Gordon 15 when you try to look at humans and terms of rigid closed system. We were trying to get a model based on law like generalization. People talk about race walking a false model. How we study the last 500 years of people that dominate not that have been finding resistance husbands often are both based on forecast and knowledge. But human beings don't have our knowledge. Political maturity, political action is not about you. We forget system. We're talking about our human, which means every system is incomplete. And liberalism, not pervasive contestation, is still possible. Which proves violence is caused by contingent factors outside the framework of liberal democracy. Also, doesn't mean being caucus. 14 post-politics about power, not up to the last. They've been overly original. Housing apocalypse, which is staples of transformers, talk about a contingent form of honesty, surrounding system politics, post-politics, post-recognized games for actually being played using vision, historical, self-movement, policies, long sectoral politics, popular role, it affects areas of sovereignty, even light totalizing, depiction of emergency, liberals, and political rumors, demonic politics without the steps of a true miracle. Skip to Isaac. Evidence trend lines prove the world is getting better for folks with disabilities. That's not to say it's perfect, but progress via institutional reforms are possible and desirable. Lawrence, 14, the modern world can be inhospitable, with 25 years of AD and increase in number of living more proud lives, restricted life space are dramatically more accessible services, expanded over transit systems to specialized scientific clothing. AD set the country new course of advanced technology, triggered sea change, mainstream innovation, revolutionize society, manufacture policies, hearing aids, maps as response to another refractor, physical quality of life, aging baby boomers, over 65 population investments are 3% boomers, disabilities are not going to secure off the margin of society. They're going to demand services and products. Their K isn't a prerequisite to engagement or framework. Going 17 within disability studies theories, which we should strive to improve the living conditions of the community. Disability theory seeks to job construction to be able to principle allow anyone to colonize disability. Disability theory continues a present cycle instead of fulfilling politically impaired goals. Disability and other non-intervention feel and advancing lives of disabled people. Disability theory continues marginalization of widens drive studies and lived experiences.
So you didn't read the Lawrence? Oh no, you did. Which evidence did you skip?
Isaac and Malhotra.
Okay, cool. Yep.
Yeah.
What is the impact of fairness other than your feelings?
So one, I think my feelings matter a lot. I don't know why you're just calling that off. Second is debate is a game. Both sides should have a relatively equal shot at winning. You've chosen an advocacy that strategically maximizes.
Okay, so what happens? What happens if debate's not fair?
It's no longer valuable as a game.
Okay, cool. That's good. There was this argument you made. It was like something about the ballot. I looked in the doc and it wasn't.
Oh yeah, I extended.
So what was the argument?
The only impact to a ballot is telling tab who won, which means fairness is the only impact that your ballot can control, because it can't like change anything in the rules or change anything about debate.
That makes sense. Okay. So under criticism, I guess, what is the terminal impact of the K?
Suffering.
Why is suffering bad?
I think sort of intuitively we would think that we should prevent people from undergoing mass amounts of suffering that would
but why is suffering
capitalism. Like I don't have like a final metaphysical explanation for why suffering is bad. People just have these sort of it's just like, I guess I'm not sure on the exact science, but whatever happens with the neurons firing in the brain that causes the bad feelings.
Cool. So this Robinson 5 evidence that you read on case, can you explain the warrant?
The argument is that when the one error inevitably lists examples, that's sort of a bad way of doing theory, because it uses a theory and then tries to find examples that fit that theory instead of finding a theory based on the examples and starting with the contingencies of the world.
Okay, but if we win that our theory is correct, does the Robinson evidence answer that as well? Or does the Robinson evidence only take out specific instances?
I'm a little confused by your question. It's a criticism of your
method.
I
asked you about the Robinson evidence.
So it's a criticism of your method of engaging in theory, where you take a broader theoretical paradigm and then find specific examples that prove that.
Where does the one I see use
your
specific
arguments,
examples?
So one is that if you don't have any examples, that proves you should probably err against your theory. Second,
wait, so if we don't have examples, you should err against our theory, but if we do have examples, you should also err against our theory? That's confusing. So what world does Robinson want? One with examples or one without examples?
It's one in which we start with examples and then use
okay,
and then
cool.
have
So
like a contingent theory of politics
that's good.
that is able to build up a theory.
Wait, so I just want to
from,
confirm, if we start with examples, that's what Robinson calls for.
Yeah, but you
okay,
didn't.
Cool. No, Armolo evidence does, that's fine. Your Gordon evidence, how does this apply to the 1AC's theory?
It's an argument about, so there are a few warrants in Gordon. First is a sort of forecasting argument. It's impossible to know what human systems are going to look like 10, 100, 1,000 years from now. These humans don't have a priori knowledge of the future. Even if, so that it takes out any sort of ontology claim, because it proves that even if that's the way the world operates now, there's no basis for generalizing that and projecting that in the future the world isn't necessarily going to operate in the same way. Do you want me to go through the other warrants?
No, that's fine. Your Kuplius warrant, what's the impact? What's the terminal impact?
It disproves that liberalism is bad.
Does anyone have a napkin by any chance I can blow my nose?
Yeah. You want Starbucks or Bojangles?
Take one of both.
Thank you. What's this? Are you okay with me asking questions? What's the status of the all?
Conditional.
Okay, cool. $143. Order will be the case, framework, and then the criticism. Everybody good? You? The world is here, the mobile civil society is structured by the disability drive, the second force of computer, all subjectivities and social relations to the subsequent deconstruction ego, body counter opinions, body media reconstruction ego, in opposition to disability, rule setting violence against disability, and attempt to distance himself from disability, though, affirmative to refuse to breathe life in a space that propagates optimism is the only ethical orientation that one can hold that is capable itself to you on the presumption that you will not be held to trigger presumption or self to evidence to stellar warranty and affirmative validation, though, affirmative method of refusal to breathe optimism to say that and introduce affective system only by voting affirmative and interjecting the affect to the research model of the bacon. We forward discussion disable killability and disrupt optimism in the space. The app is the only one disrupting optimism in the role of the ballot of the space. This disrupt nature progress within our debate and the other frame mechanism of social there's the same actor higher self-confidence nature progress in education brings violent knowledge production that is tied to eugenic project because they are oriented towards the future but disability always extreme for the future for the fear of keeping it in the gene pool that is below to evidence on. So on the second debate, 8 point is that we are not a form of political psychoanalysis which your theories are criticizing the theory act relation to the degree of falsifiability smiling towards mental disability saying symptoms such as depression or anxiety, small falsifiables, how violence is enacted against mentally disabled people. 3, we have a given a philosophical theory of the subject. You can disregard that theory of the subject to philosophical warrants or demand for falsifiability, introduces a relevant standards discussion. Also, the standard for falsifiability is ultimately regressive. For example, they do not know why pain is bad, which means everything is all falsifiable. You agree their Smith evidence is we're not a theory of development at all. They, which is Smith evidence criticizing their Robinson evidence. They do not know our theory. The way that Malone starts her analysis is not through an analysis of just psychoanalysis, but Malone starts her book on talking about how she Malone starts her book on talking about how she's going. Malone talks about finding the root cause of why the eugenics movement started first, which means we are consistent with Robinson culture in psychoanalysis. Their Rudy evidence is in the context of Edelman and how Edelman's theory of whitewash crossfire or last piece of Malone evidence. We're not that form of Edelman. Their Gordon evidence is in the context of Afro-pessimism and how the middle passage caused a closed system. Our argument is not from one theory of history, but an affective relation towards disability every single time, which means there's no link to this criticism. Their complex evidence or ontology arguments show that there is a structural claim in order for them to win this. They have to win ontology. Their Lawrence 14 evidence in the context of the ADA. The ADA was got the shit in Islamic used to keep immigrants out of the United States. Proves that long-term progress is not possible. The ADA was amendment of prior pity. Their Bone 17 argument presumes that you win ontology. We have one ontology by answering all their arguments. Framework. Communication is that disability is always a suitor for system communication because always seen as pairs of human and communicative arenas because the learning on the flow of information from one subject in order to rectify this system of communication. Now, right, exclude disability that failed attempt to integrate AS on the debate because when you slow down and kill innovation debate, empirically proves argument. Modern debate will always exclude and be violent towards disability. It's not worth preserving. The only ethical orientation is conditions right to system communication. Their internal links of fairness, quote unquote, that without fairness, when the debate loses its meaning, we prove our solvency. We accept that the one I see is unfair and that unfairness ruins and sucks the life out of debate. The next question in this debate is whether or not debate should be preserved, even if we don't win that we literally should debate. We still win, and affirm power represents a method of refusal to invest in this space, voting negative is fundamentally violent orientation because the invest in space and think that the space has some sort of value that is our self-to evidence. They have also conceded that debate is bad coming out of the 1 and 2. No new 2 in our arguments on this. Our same peer evidence is very good about talking about how we're applying this to debate. Their fairness argument was answered above by its internal link. Also, the use of fairness is fundamentally violent because it's used to preserve a system of violence. Their posture argument and all of their education arguments are fortunately worthless because our same peer evidence shows that there is a structural barrier to gain that education in the first place, which means their arguments are fortunately worthless. Their valid argument, ballots do challenge subjectivity, interjecting the affective research model. A debate solves thing about people such as Eli and Ryan Walsh when they started winning K-debate export, they want affirmative interjects into the space. It starts being reproduced, and eventually unfair strategies take over the space and suck the life out of this space. Their internal links are solvency. It's a question of whether or not debate is good or bad. Cap. Extinction case impact turns their basic impacts cross arrival to evidence of threat of their features the logic by which this belief position ontological and non-human the image of an entirely disabled or queer world is anti-ethical to the symbolic order because it trends the very continuation through anti-reproduction logic. Therefore, the image of the future requires elimination such possibly justifies curing and killing a disability. Here's an example or a world that is contingent on the racial deviancy is not worth preserving. This can be seen in Japan where the justification for environmental advocacy was a fear of becoming disabled, like kids who became disabled from the Fukushima meltdowns or Buck Morris evidence. We say that depoliticization is good, which means that their Buck Morris argument does not answer ontology arguments.
4 minutes. Yep. Are the dissents to T reasons to vote out even if I don't go for T?
We think that it proves the solvency of the app, and Shays had the 1AC like kind of materially outweighs the app because like your premise arguments prove the solvency of the app.
T cap case. Everyone ready?
Yeah, I'm good.
They're actually in the wrong order.
I'm not going for T, don't vote F1. I just claimed their model debate was bad. The ballot just reflection that you can think their models good after voting F. Still haven't won their advocacy. It's a good idea. 2, winning offense. 0, present independent reason these arguments are offense. Even if I don't go for T, you should use a standard of did my understanding of this argument change from one error to the 2 error to determine what is new because they had no more for why this is an independent reason to vote me down instead of just a reason to reject the T argument. 3 is a performative contradiction. If the theory is bad and you vote against me on this argument, you're voting on topicality. 4, all arguments are firmly favorable. The ballot arguments that determine what we can and can't read in any K or we can possibly read in response like cap race would also exclude the arguments. 5, it's a link to cap voting app on impact turns is a form of affective catharsis that makes you feel good for rejecting bad ideas but displays necessary political organizing create which strategy to materially change the world. Their only explanation of this in CS was that it proves their solvency. It doesn't prove their solvency. One app being unfair doesn't change all of the bad stuff that is done in debate, and simply injecting the research curriculum doesn't change any of the bad practices that they're talking about which is impure, which will be some of the presumption stuff on the case. And if we win the cap case, that proves that their strategy of just trying to suck the life out of debate is a bad thing because it displaces necessary organizing against capitalism. The critique. Their critique turns and outweighs the case 1 capitalism causes the ecological destruction, imperial interventions, workers' violence, and warming, all of which disproportionately affect disabled people and cause much worse forms of violence. 2 that outweighs on reversibility, or actually I'll do that wing later. 2 root cause quantity, or fellows evidence makes 2 arguments. A, the exclusion of disabled people is based on notions of productivity where disabled people were useless and couldn't produce a profit, which results in their stigmatization. This led to the internalization of biases against disabled people, which explains the violence the F discusses much better than their vague psychoanalytic theory. B, only capitalism explains material production of disability on a daily basis via lack of access to basic resources and healthcare, which exacerbate ableist disparities. That means the alternative resolves a lot of the conditions that cause the visceral reactions and violence the F discusses. Even if they're right about the disability drive, ableism occurs much more via healthcare disparities, which only the alternative can solve. And the alt still makes material conditions better for a lot of people, which is more than the affirmative affective embrace says. If we win root cause, that disproves ontology, but even if we don't win, the capitalism explains all of ableism. There are still major intersections like the alternative resolves that, but the F can't, and the F theory can't explain literally everything in the world either. No theory can meet that bar. The alternative, it solves the case. It means structurally addressing the needs of disabled communities, everyone has access to single payer healthcare, and redistribution of wealth endorses an axiom of equality that rejects dividing cochrological capitalism in favor of working class solidarity and resistance to oppression. The link debate there too. First, their skepticism of legal institutions is okay. It's a corrective but terrible zootelos for politics to make contingent resistance impossible because only the state has the institutional reach to solve material violence on a large scale. Proves the act isn't committed to necessary work to produce a better world. All reconfigures the state, which no links us a lot from their state is bad now arguments, but their fatalism locks in the ableism of the status quo. Second is ontology. It's depoliticizing good histories are about exposing contingency. Ontology displays that necessary organization mislies the status quo. The notion of an ableist ontology is a capitalist ideology because it naturalizes ableism as a product of the psyche. It's part of a transcendent theory that's hegemonic and incontestable. Ableism is not fixed in that way of doing history. Includes all the political, economic, and just ableist decisions that were made every step of the way. Think about how they cherry pick examples to support their theory. Their example, they use a singular example from Japan that could just as easily be explained by contingent factors, which proves ontological operators are inherently non-falsifiable, which is why we should sort out contingent applications of systems in practice rather than debating ultimate theoretical endpoints. It naturalizes ableism and makes contingent resistance to capital like the alt impossible. We assume there's nothing we can do to stop capitalism, so we stop trying, which is also true for achieving equality for disabled folks and climate change, which are impacts only we solve for, and reasons you shouldn't include their fatalist frame. The limelight, they say depoliticization is not responsive. These are Buckmore's evidence is more than just depoliticization. It's a question of your way of doing history and your way of theorizing ontology, which was impacted above your impact turned to extinction. 8 point, we're not the fear of extinction that you're talking about. Our terminal impact, we explained, NCS was massive suffering as a result of climate change, floods, resource wars, starvation, etc. are all terrible. And even if the rate that death would be good, that is not the way we should do it because it allows massive amounts of suffering that are terrible. B point is there literally just one example from Japan. It doesn't prove that any fear of extinction is always better, it's necessary, intrinsic, or that we shouldn't stop those forms of suffering. C point, it is not intrinsic. This is a Hitler pants argument. Just because people do bad stuff when they're scared of extinction doesn't prove there is something intrinsically bad about stopping everyone from dying and undergoing massive amounts of suffering. This argument was underexplained. It was underexplained in the one error, and they blazed through it, which means you shouldn't let them explode in the 2 error. And even if they're right about it, the alternative is still able to resolve a lot of oppression that occurs to disabled folks, which is an independent external impact and a reason to vote negative. The case. Presumption, they have no reason the ballot is key to any of their offense. If they're right that debate is bad, that voting app is being complicit in that structure, and it relies on so many other structures of the communicative form of debate, which means that they don't solve two subpoints. 8 point is they have one rounds before. There's no reason interjecting in this specific debate is necessarily key, especially because it's just a prelim route. B point is you can inject their curriculum and research curriculum and model on the ballot by just writing down their theory on the ballot or their accuracy on the ballot while still negating. There's no reason why signing the telling tab that he won the debate is necessarily key to any of their impacts. Now, the ontology debate, you should have a very high bar for them winning ontology. If there's a risk of progress, that's a reason you should default negative. Our Gordon evidence indicates that debates about structural opposites and pessimism are inevitably a red herring because it's impossible to know in 10, 100, 1,000 years exactly what social systems will look like because humans don't have that a priori knowledge or the ability to predict exactly what the future is going to entail. The warrant is, even if the card is in the context of APROPES, the warrant still applies because it's a question of humans' ability to forecast the future and the fact that because it's a human system, it is always changeable and there are always actions that can foster or hinder freedom, which means any risk of defense of their ontology claims is a reason to vote out. I'm going for the Lawrence evidence. It indicates that empirics like ADA prove that trend lines are going the opposite way and lives are getting much better for disabled folk. It disproves their structural claim because empirics are most verifiable because it proves that our progress is somewhat possible, and even if they're right about the general structure, there can still be material conditions that improve within that structure, which proves the alternative can get their example of it being used to exclude immigrants proves our argument about the inherent contingency of politics because that was a specific choice made by policymakers that increase or decrease violence, which proves that violence is never static and there can always be specific actions taken by the government that can increase or decrease the amount of violence. So it proves that it's possible to change the amount of violence, which disproves their ontology claim and proves that things like the alternative is good because it alleviates a lot of violence.
And 1.3. I have a high bar flow for the 2 hour. What argument was that on? Oh, that was only ontology. Sorry.
That was just an overview ontology.
Okay. The only ontology warrants were Gordon and Lawrence.
Yeah. And ontology answers.
The order will be the case, and then on cap on the impact term. Everybody good? Good. The Disability Drive Institute advocate of psychic force that governs relations between disabled folk in civil society. When individuals interact with disabled folk, they undergo a moment of self-reflection when they project a person's social location on self that causes a moment of ego. That's when the self is forced to come to terms with the temporariness of ability test in order to reconcile this anxiety. The ego reconstructs itself in opposition to disability, causing disability to become an ontological negative vote, affirmative to affirm their future, and unyielding pessimism. Only the affirming can disrupt communicative suicide. Always propagate optimism. Affirm the ballot as a method of refusal. Breathe life into the spaces that are capable and talk to evidence of their mind. All framing is on the presumption debate is that if we win our impact turn, you can still vote affirmative. Also, our sub to evidence is very good in describing an affirmative ballot. It says that constant refusal, even though this is a prelim to me, is a question of our orientation towards the space all the time. Or sub to evidence is that a method of refusal and a method of pessimism is always needed. And that is the ballot keyboard, which they have not answered. They have not done enough analysis on. Or sub to or on the Gordon evidence. They have conceded all of our responses. They conceded that their Gordon evidence in the context of how one event shaped reality, but they have conceded that our theory of psychoanalysis and our theory of ontology is not about one. It's not about one event, but a constant interaction. They've conceded that it's their Gordon evidence is how the middle pass to create a closed system. And they have conceded that even if that closed system is true, it's a question of how that closed system operates, which is our theory of psychoanalysis. They have not extended any psychoanalysis of bad offense, which they have not get access to their Lawrence evidence. They have conceded all the analysis that we did on their Lawrence evidence. They conceded that the 88 empirically proves the disability tried, that the 88 was a moment of primary pity, and then once secondary pity was enacted, it got rejected. They say that this proves that violence is contingent. No, it not empirically proves our theory and shows how our theories operated within the realm of politics. The impact term. Cross-applying to evidence, essential thesis or argument is that the image of no future planet is a continuation of the symbolic order. This mobilizes investment to hallucinaries that make the future possible. Therefore, the image of a disabled future or a queer future becomes a threat of very symbolic order, since that it means no more reproduction. This means the preservation of future requires a career killing disability to get there. A world that is contingent on the racial deviancy is not worth preserving. They have conceded the line out of the one era that a world that is contingent on the racial deviancy is not worth preserving, because fundamentally preserving a world that is filled with eugenics Rex is not justified. Why the world is worth preserving. All their arguments about how all results forms of violence. They've conceded that their attempts at futurism always require forms of violence, which means their alternative does not resolve any forms of violence, yet their alternative and fundamental investment in futurism requires a erasure of disability. They say it's not they say that they're afraid of the future. It's a question of your orientation towards the future. They're freakish to their it's a question of your orientation towards the future. It's Armello 2 evidence, and they've not answered the internal link of our warrant. They say it's not intrinsic. It's a question of futurism. That Armello 2 evidence is stellar, and you should read it after the debate. And that's talking about like all orientation towards futurism. That they say it's one example. No, that was just an example to prove our internal link of a war that you conceded. They say psychoanalysis is non-falsifiable. They conceded non-falsifiability. It's ultimately non-unique. It is a violent standard in the context of mental disability. They say that root cause disproves ontology. No, it's not, because you folks conceded to impact that is the basis of our ontology. Look, this debate is very easy. They have not justified why the world is worth preserving. They conceded Merlot 2 analysis about why futurism is fundamentally violent and why there is no point in preserving a world that is contingent on racial deviancy. Good debate.